No one can ever predict what lies behind the closed doors of worlds. Is there some supreme being that controls all people and animals or not? However, the unknown god kept a smile on his face as he was confident in his rights. He was amused because he knew what awaited the main character who ended up in another world. The girl herself did not even suspect that she would not be able to live easily and calmly as she wanted. She looked around in confusion because she should have just died. The lady's past life was gradually erased from her memory, which made her panic. And then some strange guy started demanding that Miss find his bride. Another said that his lady love broke off their engagement, but he wants to get her back. A third unknown person sadly reported that his girlfriend had also recently disappeared. All three of these demanded that the heroine hurry up and find their loved ones as soon as possible. But the girl herself had no idea what was going on, since she had not investigated cases in her past life. She tripped and fell into a hole after hearing that she would now be a detective named Celia Welf. Miss was not happy with such a role, but the strange dream did not want to let go of the poor girl. The lady desperately tried to find a way out of this nightmare, which was consuming her more and more. And the unknown god with a smiling mask silently looked at the heroine, who was drowning in the depths of the new world. Initially, the girl lived in an ordinary developed city, of which there were many throughout the country. But one accident at a pedestrian crossing changed her whole life in an instant. She was an orphan since childhood, so she was used to achieving everything on her own and overcoming difficulties. But the people around still looked disapprovingly at the girl who stood out from their company. So Miss was not at all sad to die, because in this world no one cried for her. During her life, the heroine read many novels in the hope of getting into one of them. She hoped to open her eyes and find herself a noble lady from a sweet romantic fantasy. But the girl was not against getting into the body of a knight who would bravely fight monsters. Most of all, Mrs. Hart sank at the thought that she would become the heroine of a play. But the new world greeted the traveller with dirty and broken glass. The girl noticed a system window that popped up in front of her while studying the new face. From it, the heroine learned that she had now become a private detective named Celia Welf. But the lady had never read a book like this before, so she was horrified. It seemed to her that the whole place had been uninhabited for several centuries. The setting suggested that the heroine was not at all caught up in a romantic plot. Celia studied the documents around her, which told her a little about her new role. Suddenly, the girl noticed an unusually beautiful bouquet of artificial roses on the table. The note said that the sender was pleased with the opening of the detective agency. But Welf was not ready for such responsibility because she wanted an easy life for herself. She was afraid that now she would have to beg for every coin from noble aristocrats. This is because secondary characters in history are rarely respected. But the lady's plans did not include being left without money and without means of subsistence. The newly minted detective had no idea that a carriage was heading towards her destroyed building. All Celia could think was that she didn't like this new role with its enormous responsibility. And as luck would have it, at that moment there was a knock on the door that echoed throughout the room. A tall male silhouette appeared on the threshold, wrapped in a long cloak because of the weather. This man seemed to incinerate with his cold gaze every living thing that he encountered. Celia was instantly chilled to the bone at the sight of such a cruel and evil client. But the system window notified the girl that she had her first detective case. So the aristocrat clearly had no intention of leaving, as he had an important request. He brazenly sat down on the best chair and began to wait for the detective to listen to him. It was Marcus Graydon, who hated to be mistreated. However, the lady herself had just woken up in this place, so she didn't even have time to clean up. The aristocrat casually threw the papers on the table, demanding that the woman be found. But this did not make the situation clearer for Celia, who was still trying to get into character. It turned out that the Marcus's wife, Chelsea Graydon, was planning to divorce him. What hurt him most was the thought that he would never see the runaway lady again. The aristocrat could hardly contain his rage at the thought that the girl had left without his permission. Welf realized with chagrin that this was precisely the kind of person she would prefer not to get involved with. But the lady was unable to refuse her first client because of a systemic task. Finally, the Marquis angrily promised that he would kill the detective with his own hands if he failed. As soon as he left, the heroine screamed in horror throughout the room because she was not prepared for the task. She had already imagined in her head how obsessed this Marquis was with his wife. Celia was sure that this man was a real psychopath since he behaved like that. Overwhelmed with emotion, the lady fell tiredly onto the sofa, trying to remember a similar story. But the heroine wasn't sure that she had ever encountered such a strange romance before. Despite the possible death, the reader was in anticipation of the story's development. But the girl had very few options, since she became an agency detective. Celia did not get upset and loudly declared that she would definitely cope with everything. Her vast experience in reading novels told her that runaway wives are always found. So the heroine only had to find such a story and study it carefully. Right after these thoughts, a bright light poured out from the system window in front of Celia. A notification popped up saying that a library with books was now available to the detective. And then the book itself appeared, which was supposed to tell the story of the Graydon family. And it told the story of poor Chelsea, who was unloved after the death of her parents. The girl meekly endured all the bullying that was directed at her. To escape the influence of her uncle's family, she quickly married Marcus Graydon. And to Chelsea's surprise, she was able to easily find common ground with the seemingly cold man. The spouses even began to experience moments that they only experienced together. Even his dying mother accepted the girl who so quickly adopted the new family's surname. It was only after the death of the old Marchioness that everything changed in the life of happy Chelsea. She was the first to talk about divorce under the pretext that they no longer needed to pretend. However, the lady was unable to cope with the anger of Graydon, who had become attached to her. The man was furious when the lady said that she no longer needed him. Reading this story in the system window, the heroine could hardly hold back her tears from the romantic plot. Celia, even in her past life, had a love for any obsessive and beautiful characters. It just turned out that the detective didn't have enough money to read the sequel. The system just now told us that wealth had to work for the money to be credited, so the girl needed to find information about the case for which she would receive payment. The window gave a hint that the more closely the places are connected to the case, the higher the fee will be. So the lady had to go to the Marquis of Graydon's estate to earn money. No matter how upset the heroine was about this, she went on to complete her mission. As soon as the girl entered the missing Marquise's room, the system immediately added coins. This delighted Celia, who was eager to read the rest of the story. The detective's eyes were burning with desire to investigate the case and learn more about the story. So Welf immediately began looking for any clues that would help her in her investigation. She managed to find the window through which the Graydons often looked at the stars at night. The lady also received coins for finding the cups from which the heroes constantly drank. But Celia didn't give up and looked for something that would give her a lot of money right away if she found it. And this object turned out to be a letter that was lying in a secret drawer of the desk. For some reason, it was addressed to the Larman family, from which Chelsea had once fled. Welf didn't like the fact that her uncle was clearly bossing around the orphan he had taken under his wing. The girl was sure that Chelsea had entered into marriage only to leave Larmin. So the lady did not understand why the Marquise still maintained contact with her relatives. However, right now, the heroine could not resist the temptation in front of the soft sofa. This furniture was nothing compared to what stood in her dirty and dusty office. In the moment of her sincere joy, Miss did not notice how the doors to the rooms suddenly swung open. It turned out that the maids had visited the Marquise's chambers to clean in her absence. At the sight of them, Celia froze in fear because she was not in the best position. But the assistants pretended not to notice anything unusual about the agency detective. Welf ran away as quickly as possible, trying to get the image of jumping on someone else's furniture out of her head. But then the system window warned the heroine that the maids had found something dangerous. Although the box that the girls found didn't look scary at all from the outside, this made the detective instantly wary of the notification from the system. Meanwhile, the maids thought about checking the contents of the item. but Celia rushed past them like a hurricane and snatched the box to save the girls. The assistant followed the strange detective in confusion, but did not argue. And Wealth calmed down only when she realized that no one was definitely following her. She was troubled by the fact that a seemingly ordinary object was highlighted as dangerous. And inside, on a soft pillow, was a small, inconspicuous gardening seed. Without understanding anything, the lady went to explore the next chambers in the Marquis's estate. She even turned to the maids out of desperation, since she was completely lacking information. The assistants were able to remember that their mistress really did love to eat fruit. They said the Larman family regularly sent Chelsea their own berries. On this basis, Graydon's wife got together with the old Marchioness who was growing a greenhouse. And the maids couldn't understand why Chelsea's face had changed so much since then. However, at that moment the command for dinner was given, so all the girls ran away. Celia followed them with her eyes in surprise, as she had not expected such speed. But the information about the fruit made it clear to the lady that not everything was so simple in Chelsea's disappearance. Continuing her search, the girl was able to find a notebook for which she received a lot of money. Wealth was glad that such an insignificant thing was worth so much to her. But then a small piece of paper, folded in half, fell out of the notebook and landed on the floor. Celia carefully crouched down next to it to find out why it was carefully hidden. It turned out that it was a letter from the old Marquise to her new and young relative. In it, the old woman wrote that she wanted to hand over all management of the Chelsea greenhouse. She didn't feel sorry for all those herbs and plants, since the girl knew how to take good care of them. Wealth understood perfectly well that the greenhouse had a significant influence on this whole story. So the lady still had some time to spend exploring the estate. This is because the information received was insufficient to draw conclusions. From the stories of the maids and from the plot, it was clear that Chelsea was liked by everyone around her. Therefore, Miss could not understand why the girl was unhappy with the greenhouse. A system window popped up in front of the heroine, asking what happened to the missing Marquise. And Celia guessed that the girl had run away because of the seeds, one of which was in the box. But the detective's further thoughts were interrupted by a sharp male voice that addressed her. It turned out that the Marquis had quietly approached the girl, who, in his opinion, was wasting her time. Only now did Wealth realize that the aristocrat had also influenced his wife's escape. But directly presenting this to the heroine would have been life-threatening, so she remained silent. And the Marquis began to scold the detective for not working on his case. In response, the detective began to beg the man to let her look at his room. This request visibly angered the aristocrat, who did not allow anyone into his office. However, he did not dare to confront the lady who was trying to secretly find his wife. The heroine noticed that the system window warned her about the high danger in this place. The whole point was that she was under the close supervision of her owner. Although the Marquis was against such an intrusion, he did not interfere with the detective in his search. So Celia, with a dejected look, had to create the appearance of at least some activity. Although, in reality, Wealth would have preferred to return to the room without the owner's supervision. The aristocrat accompanied every action of the girl with a dissatisfied and caustic grumbling. The heroine refrained from responding rudely only because she did not want to die. Like the maids before him, the man remembered that his beloved liked fruit. The only thing he didn't really like was that the lady only ate the fruits that the family sent. The detective was intrigued by the fact that Chelsea did not want to share her food with anyone. Even the assistants spoke with surprise about how they could not eat the lady's fruits. Suddenly, the gears in the heroine's head fell into place, and an idea came to her. She turned sharply to the Marquis, asking if Chelsea had tried planting the seeds. The aristocrat actually noticed something similar in his wife, but never gave it any importance. Celia was pleased to learn about the seeds the Larman family had sent. Here the system notified that in front of the heroine there was a book that for some reason was important to Chelsea. Wealth then noticed an engagement ring left next to the baked cookies. The Marquis himself did not even pay attention to all the traces that Chelsea left for him. So he couldn't understand why the detective was examining things so carefully. But the heroine realized what made her suddenly angry at the stupid Marquis. The girl was seriously worried about why the aristocrat took his wedding ring off his finger, and at first the Marquis did not want to answer such a personal question, which concerned only him. However, he admitted that he wanted to please Chelsea with something better, something she deserved. The head of the estate himself did not like their first ring, although the lady was delighted with it. And just recently he found an expensive material from which he decided to make a new ring. But the lady guessed that Chelsea had decided that her husband had fallen out of love with her, since he was walking around without a symbol of marriage. But what came as a surprise to the aristocrat was that he himself had broken his wife's heart. The man categorically did not see any difference between wearing a ring or not. And the heroine had to explain to the stupid Marquis that girls perceive everything differently. The detective reminded that it was the aristocrat who would have to heal Chelsea's heart. Only now did the man agree that he was indeed at fault before his wife. Celia noticed that the Marquis had become more obedient and grinned contentedly at her achievements. But then another message from the system frightened the girl as it suddenly appeared in front of her. It turned out that the lady had completely completed her inspection and searched for things in the Marquis's room. Since Welf now had enough money, she was going to read Graydon's whole story. And for some reason in the book, Chelsea believed that running away was her only salvation. For some reason, she only got worse, to the point that Miss began coughing up blood, and the girl could not forgive herself for what she had done out of stupidity and ignorance. The story began with the fact that the lady had not eaten fruit from her family for more than a month. She felt like she was on edge because those berries weren't as simple as they seemed. The Marquise was restless and could not sleep even at night because of her disturbing thoughts, and the presence of her beloved husband could only console Chelsea for a few minutes. Even to him, Madame could not confess the burden she kept in her heart. Although the Marquis spoke in a gentle voice about how his beloved had become much worse looking, he was ready to give his wife warmth and affection at any moment, if only she asked. But the girl herself did not believe the guy's words because he had already taken off his wedding ring a long time ago. So Chelsea only thought about how to escape from this place and forget about the guilt. She arranged everything so that on the next full moon she would be able to sail away from the Empire on a ship. As soon as the heroine read this story, she rushed in a carriage to the harbour with ships. The coachman was so sleepy that he was in no particular hurry, despite the miss's excitement. Celia knew it would be difficult to persuade Chelsea to return because of her condition. The whole thing was that the girl had been eating poisoned fruit since childhood and had become accustomed to the poison. Thus, the Lamin family desperately tried to keep the girl close to them. And the detective hasn't yet figured out how to save poor Chelsea from the poison's effects on her body. The heroine wanted to enjoy a carefree life, but fate threw up problems. But the system window rewarded the diligent lady with a store for increasing characteristics. Celia was only too glad to acquire additional assistance from the accommodating instrument. Even in her past life, Welf was a sucker for discounts, so she couldn't resist this time either. Meanwhile, in the harbour, everyone was in full swing preparing to sail to another country. Chelsea hid among the people, although until the very end she was not sure that she had made the right choice. But the captain's assistants didn't care who they took on board as long as they got paid. The Marquise had almost boarded the ship when suddenly someone called out to her from behind. It turned out to be Celia in disguise, who was trying not to reveal her identity at the port. The detective's goal was to do everything possible to make the Marquise want to return on her own. And for the first few minutes, the heroine couldn't find the right words to start a conversation. She suggested that only the closeness of the old woman and the girl Graydon could have made Chelsea change her mind. So Welf reminded the girl that the greenhouse would quickly fall into disrepair if the lady left it. The Marquise did not expect that some stranger would begin to shame her for attempting to escape. Celia did not sympathise with Madame and asked her not to regret the consequences of her ruthless choice. These words reached Chelsea's heart, who really didn't want to leave the Graydon estate. Without saying another word to the unknown man, the girl walked past him with confident steps. The heroine saw the lady off with a joyful smile, since she did not believe that she could influence her. The ship's assistant captain didn't even glance at the passenger who decided not to go on board. But Celia was interested to hear their concerns about the dangerous and strict captain. Soon the detective was able to remove her disguise, which greatly hindered her usual clothing appearance. Miss could not help but rejoice that true happiness was soon awaiting the Graydon family. But the girl couldn't stop thinking about what would await her when the couple's story was over. Then one of the sailors ran past the detective, barely dragging a heavy box to the ship. Celia immediately noticed that this luggage was somehow noticeably different from the rest of the cargo. Suddenly the girl looked closer and noticed that black human hair was seeping through the boards. Although no one knew about it, there really was an emaciated boy named Damon sitting in that box. As much as the heroine would like to think that she had simply made a mistake, the system window made it clear otherwise. This circumstance saddened the lady, who could not ignore such injustice. The fact that a child was being carried around in a box so unceremoniously did not give the girl any peace. She peered closely into the cracks of the box, but could not see anything else inside it. Celia felt sick at the realization that the ship's captain was so clearly committing a real crime. The only salvation for the girl was a suitcase with fog purchased in the system window. Welf didn't hesitate for a second when she took out this rare item to help the child unknown to her. The heroine took a good running start and threw the box right onto the deck of the ship about to sail away. A few minutes before, the sailors carefully lifted the box with the child on board, not knowing what to do next. The boys were faced with unclear instructions for the first time while working, so they felt confused. And little Damon still sat quietly in the box, as he was used to being locked up. It was at this moment that the men on deck noticed a strange object in the sky. The box that Celia threw onto the deck flew swiftly and directly to its target, thanks to magic. As soon as she reached her destination, she opened up, releasing a thick and dense fog. The sailors had never encountered anything like this before, so they began running around the deck in confusion. In the end, even Damon got it, feeling like someone accidentally pushed the box. During his sad life, the boy became so disillusioned with fate that he did not try to escape. So he couldn't believe his eyes when the lid suddenly opened and a girl appeared in front of him. Celia tried to take the child as quickly as possible, just so that he would not remain in this terrible place. And Damon didn't expect that anyone would want to take care of him, to save him from the terrible shackles of slavery. Before the fog completely cleared, the lady wanted to get off the ship unnoticed by the sailors. She didn't know exactly how long the boy would be able to run after her, as he looked very thin and weak. Suddenly, a tall, red-haired guy appeared in front of the heroine and noticed her in the fog. No matter how hard she tried, Welf couldn't break free from the man's tight grip because he was the captain. But the lady had no intention of letting go of the child's hand from Kiesel Shark, who had transported him so cruelly. Damon himself was prepared for the stranger to back down and give him to the people who would sell him at the pier. The ship's captain was determined to punish the errant lady who tried to take one of his goods. But Celia didn't want to show her face to a scoundrel who didn't care about people. She took advantage of the confusion created and pulled the child along with her, who ran limply alongside her. Cashel smiled as he saw off the thief, who turned out to be surprisingly agile and fast for him. However, he ordered his assistants not to pursue these people because he was not sure of the boy's choice. Sharka was amused by the fact that some unknown girl showed her impudent character, and the heroine slowed down only when she was sure that they were no longer being pursued. Celia was very out of breath and could hardly breathe, but fear did not allow her to stop in place. Having calmed down, the miss fell to the ground with relief, but did not let go of the boy's hand. The detective was interested in who the ship's boss was, who looked similar to the main character. She guessed that the book with the story she needed had already appeared in her home library. But the system window didn't give any clues, which only made Welf even more frustrated. The problems were compounded by the silent and beaten boy, who seemed afraid to move on his own. The heroine was even afraid to squeeze his hand. She looked so sick and weak. To Celia, this boy seemed like the real protagonist of some heavy novel. It then dawned on the lady that there was more than one main love branch in this world. So this child could also become a client of a detective in the future. Although right now it seemed as if the boy could barely stand on his feet due to fatigue and pallor. Before, it had never occurred to Celia that she was in more than one situation. But now the lady realized that she had found herself in the very epicenter of all sorts of events. The girl's task was clearly to help the heroes of the story achieve a happy ending. But it turned out that that red-haired guy was also a hero in some other story. Celia was horrified at the thought of how badly she had started communicating with one of her clients. However, Miss had already kidnapped the boy, so it was too late to retreat. Welf's only concern was that she was once again involved in an affair she knew nothing about. But Miss didn't like to be upset for long, so she decided to talk to the child first. But Damon didn't remember his family at all, because his past consisted of painful memories. No matter how hard Celia tried, she couldn't find a single relative of the boy. The heroine was sure that this baby was supposed to become the main character in one of the novels. So Welf could not afford to take responsibility for such a character. But if the detective had simply left, the child would have been left on the street because he didn't know anyone. Celia realized too late that she had put too much pressure on the boy, who was left alone. So the detective corrected herself and suggested that the baby go with her for now. For his sake, she quickly lit the fireplace in the room to warm the entire room with fire. At the same time, the lady didn't even think that she would be so tired because of today's events. Celia hoped that tomorrow the complicated case of the Graydon family would be completely resolved. While she had time to think, the girl wondered if this role was right for her. In her past life, the heroine was lonely and poor, despite all her efforts. Every day, it seemed to her more and more that no one needed her in that world. It was for this reason that the girl became fascinated with novels about people moving into other bodies. In those stories, the heroes were always loved by someone, even if they did nothing in return. So at first, Miss was even glad that she was able to be reborn in another world. But Celia didn't want to be a detective for the novels she once read. What irritated Welf most was the existence of a system window that only she could see. Suddenly the girl noticed that Damon had managed to return to the room while she was lost in thought. But the boy dried himself so poorly that the water was dripping off him almost like a stream. Therefore, Celia had to play the role of not only a detective, but also a caring mother. She saw how Damon was so bad at taking care of his body due to the constant lack of water. So the detective took matters into her own hands and volunteered to personally help the boy with the drying. Although the lady did not see it, the baby blushed with embarrassment because he was pleased with the help. But Celia didn't expect the child to suddenly announce that he didn't need to be taken care of. He promised that he could do anything as long as it didn't involve murder. The lady's hands trembled at this information, and she froze in place in horror. Celia was seriously frightened by the seriousness in the boy's voice, who was ready for anything. More than anything, Damon was afraid that this lady would throw him out the door like everyone else. But the girl had no intention of leaving the boy alone on the street at such a time. No matter how hard it was for her in her past life, the heroine could not understand the burden of this child. She promised that the boy could stay overnight to rest peacefully after his escape. Suddenly, Damon turned his back to the lady as if he had no intention of listening to her. Under the girl's surprised gaze, he began to remove all the accumulated dust. The heroine was so surprised at first that she didn't immediately think to stop the boy. The child didn't pay any attention to the girl, as cleaning took up all his energy. The more time he ignored Celia, the angrier she became about it. However, Damon kept his calm face and continued cleaning everywhere in the house. In the end, the heroine couldn't stand it any longer and grabbed the baby by the hands, just so he wouldn't touch anything. She got a response about the fact that the detective didn't even bother to clean up earlier. The adult's position at least somewhat saved the lady from shame in this uncomfortable situation. Suddenly, Damon screamed that he didn't want to be abandoned because he was supposedly useless. The boy was determined to prove that he could become the best assistant in the world. He didn't think about the fact that the head of the agency didn't need such strange sacrifices at all. Celia would like to make life easier for this little one who was already suffering a lot. She could see from the boy's hands how much hardship he had endured before. Therefore, the girl only sighed and did not scold the wayward and disobedient child. She quickly and confidently wiped Damon's hands, which had become dirty. She still felt embarrassed about her carelessness in managing her household chores. Looking at his hands, the boy began to beg the lady not to send him out into the street. He had been through so much that he was willing to stay in the house even if it was being used. Only now did the heroine realize how exactly Damon had survived all this time among people. The best thing the boy could do was serve and carry out other people's orders from the outside. But Miss wasn't sure she could take on such responsibility. Although the child was ready to work even without pay, the girl herself had no intention of doing so. Sally just wanted to lie down in bed and rest, forgetting about all the problems in life. Damon kept his eyes on the detective, wanting the job. Then the lady came up with the idea of taking advantage of the boy's obedience and making him eat. The child did not expect that all he would be required to do was go to bed after a heavy dinner. Welf pretended that there was no point in arguing with her if he wanted to stay in the house for the night. So the boy listened to the instructions with his mouth open, but did not even think of disobeying. Before leaving, the lady promised that she would definitely check that all the tasks were completed. Damon watched the closed door absent-mindedly for a while longer, afraid of a trick. As soon as he went to bed, heavy thoughts fell upon the boy, and he could not fall asleep. For the first time in his life, the child had such a simple and clear order that he was surprised. Previously, evil and cruel adults indiscriminately did whatever they wanted to the baby. Damon's masters changed at the speed of light, but each one was only worse than the last. Most often, the boy was forced to fight with adults for the sake of spectacles, which were not fun. And the little girl had no choice but to obediently do everything that was said. In his head, the same vile mouth constantly whispered that he must silently obey. So soon the child remembered only how to properly look after aristocrats. And so it was until one of the gentlemen decided to transport him by ship. The captain could not help but know about such a cargo, but he was surprised at the sight of a little boy. Deep down, Damon hoped that these people would simply kill him and end his suffering. But Cashel didn't bother to investigate and simply ordered the boy to be stuffed into a large box. That's how the baby became the cargo on the ship, sent to its new owner. And Damon's terrible life would have continued like this if Celia hadn't suddenly appeared nearby. So the child reached out to the girl's hand with both hands, wanting to finally become free. This lady became a symbol of hope and faith for the boy that not all was lost. After all, in fact, he had long wanted to throw off the tiresome shackles that forced him to obey. However, Damon's way of thinking had not changed, so he believed that Miss needed something. The kid was afraid that he would soon start to irritate the detective and lose his home. Meanwhile, the heroine was worried about what she should do with the boy she had saved. She was afraid that she had interfered with a very important story and was hindering its further development. That's why Celia was tearing her hair out with the desire to get Damon out as quickly as possible. The thoughts the lady sent out into the universe were so powerful that the system responded. As a result, Welf spent the entire night reading the books that appeared, wanting to study the information. The girl's attention was so distracted by fatigue that she did not notice Damon. That's why the heroine reacted too violently to the child who came down to her. Celia blushed because her behavior was not befitting of a grown woman. But the boy was not at all embarrassed by the appearance of the detective, whom he almost idolized. The girl remembered that she hadn't had time to introduce herself to the child, so she told him about herself. She asked him to live here for a while as her faithful and capable assistant. Damon couldn't have dreamed of being offered such a pleasant role. No matter how much Welf thought about it, she came to the conclusion that a temporary assistant wouldn't hurt her. She was genuinely pleased to please the little one who had hardly smiled before. The lady hoped that the new life in her agency would not make the boy suffer again. Looking at the baby's puzzled face, the miss thought that she had achieved her goal. In fact, she had read a lot of psychology and did everything to make Damon want to run away. But the lady had no idea that such a life was many times better than anything the baby had seen before. For this reason, all the girl's strict commands did not offend the obedient assistant in the least. Celia, with a smile on her face, completely fenced Damon off from the outside world, thinking that he would leave. However, the boy himself was only glad to never meet those evil people again. He was very good at housework, but he had never been promised payment for it before. Walking around the city, the lady eagerly awaited the moment when she would return to the empty house. She was going to do everything possible to ensure that the child escaped as soon as possible. Since the heroine repeated all the advice from the book, she hoped that she had nothing to worry about. Before Celia left, she remembered Damon's sweet and worried face as he was left alone. His appearance increasingly reminded the lady of her favourite dark-haired characters from books. Miss would have kept Damon as an assistant if he hadn't been the main character in another story. She took good care of the boy's escape and specially left him a bag of money. And the heroine herself had to deal with the harmful and arrogant Marquis Graydon. The man was clearly dissatisfied with any actions on the part of the leisurely detective. He didn't even give the lady a chance to take the conversation into her own hands and tell everything about the matter. But in the end, Celia quite admitted that Chelsea should be in the greenhouse now. She was confident that she had been able to convince the girl not to abandon what was most sacred. Graydon's wife was so attached to the old Marchioness that she did not forget about the greenhouse. Madame remembered the time when her parents left her with nothing after their death. As a result, the girl was given to a cruel uncle, which she did not know at the time. A man with evil intentions fed a little girl poisonous fruits. Since the girl had been mistreated before, she was glad even to receive such care. That's why Chelsea didn't doubt for a second that her uncle had taken her in so kindly. After eating poisonous fruits, the baby felt much stronger at first. And the evil uncle was glad that in the future the girl would not be able to be without them for long. At that time, Chelsea had no idea what such false concern from a relative would mean for her. She didn't pay attention to the poisonous grin on the man's face, who was pleased. What pleased the lady most was that her uncle allowed only her to eat fruit. Chelsea thought it was because the man cared about his niece. Even after she got married, the Larmin family continued to send fruit for the girl. And the carefree miss began to share them with the sick Marquise, wishing for her to get better. But day by day the old woman grew paler and paler because the poison was acting more and more strongly. Graydon's wife had no idea that she was slowly killing Madame with her own hands. When her uncle stopped sending fruit, Chelsea tried to grow it herself. But for some reason these sprouts sucked the life out of all the plants growing in the area. In a panic, Chelsea began reading a lot of literature about plants, trying to find an answer. And soon the girl managed to find out that all this time she had been feeding on cursed fruits. The Marquise had no idea how destructive her uncle's care turned out to be for her. He simply used the girl, after which he brutally plunged the scissors into her back. Chelsea was bitter to realize that only now did she learn the whole truth about her uncle. The only thing that made the girl happy was that she ate more fruit than the others. She felt guilty for sharing fruit with the dead Marquise so many times. But Chelsea didn't have time to fix anything as the maid suddenly burst into the room. The Marquise's eyes widened in horror when she heard that the old woman had died. All the things after the late mother were quickly put in order and put away on the far shelves. Graydon quietly experienced what happened and did not support his young wife at all. And Chelsea was tormented by the desire to confess to her husband what she had done with her own hands. But the lady lacked the moral strength to take responsibility and tell the truth. The Marquis attributed his wife's nervous state to sadness after the death of her sick mother. And Chelsea only pushed her thoughts deeper into the trap of her mind, unable to admit it. It came as a surprise to her that the old woman left 2 letters as a will. Misunderstood that they had become closer to each other, but she did not expect that this would affect the Marquise. Chelsea could barely hold back tears as she read the message the old woman was trying to convey. The woman asked the miss to do only one thing for her, and that was to plant some spiritual grass. And from this simple request, Graydon's wife felt much sadder and more melancholy in her soul. She was tired of shedding tears from the realization that her mother had died so quickly because of her. However, at this moment, the lady gathered her resolve to finish the old woman's work. Spiritual grass was difficult to grow, but Chelsea was determined to give it her best shot. She used to spend hours observing the growth of the sprouts, but she was never able to grow them. Chelsea was sad about her failures, but her mother always supported the girl with kind words. So now the lady also felt guilty for wanting to abandon the Marquise's life's work. Chelsea was relieved to see fresh flowers, but then she heard her husband's voice. Graydon came to the greenhouse on a tip from a detective because he wanted to get his beloved wife back. The Marquise looked at the man with alarm, since she was not ready to speak frankly with him. Chelsea was frightened that the aristocrat would suggest that she hated him so much. For the first time in a long time, Graydon showed his feelings, and it became clear that he was sad. The Marquise froze in place because she had never seen her husband's face look so sad before. Tears came to the lady's eyes because she truly loved her husband. The miss fell to her knees in front of the man as guilt overwhelmed her. Graydon couldn't stand aside because he wanted to be reunited with the lady again. Chelsea's face filled with tears, and then the aristocrat said that his mother had died for another reason. He explained that the Marquise knew everything perfectly well, but allowed her death to happen. Graydon couldn't immediately understand why the old woman had left him such a will. The whole point was that the old Marchioness begged her son to take care of young Chelsea. She knew in advance how little time she had left because of the poisonous fruits. Therefore, the man considered himself guilty for not talking to his wife in time. His tender words made the girl burst into tears even more because she wanted to hear something like that. And the guy took out a box with new wedding rings and presented it to the lady. Graydon admitted that he wants to spend the rest of his life only with his beloved. He wasn't at all alarmed by the fact that Chelsea had developed an addiction to her uncle's poisonous fruits. The Marquise understood that she could never leave her beloved husband again. She hugged him back tenderly and burst into tears, letting out all her emotions. Chelsea, through tears, said that she was truly sorry for everything that had happened to them. But the lady could not understand how the Marquis found out about her poisonous fruits. And at that moment, Celia took the opportunity and introduced herself to the young lady. The detective burst into tears from emotion, as she had always been sensitive to touching scenes. But Chelsea didn't recognize this strange girl who was bawling her eyes out for some reason. Graydon had no intention of helping Welf, as he only cared about his beloved's feelings. Then the heroine reminded that it was the right time to open the greenhouse. Chelsea stared in surprise at the girl who knew too much about her. But in fact, the Marquise herself wanted to know whether the flowers she had grown were still alive. Celia couldn't help but smile in anticipation, as she really wanted to see the flowers. She hoped that in this place she could find a large incentive amount from the system. So the heroine mentally urged Chelsea to open the doors to the greenhouse. But the Marquise was overcome with doubts and fears, so the lady could not bring herself to enter. It was only when Graydon gently covered his wife's hand with his own that she felt bolder. The aristocrat silently reminded him that he would not, in any case, treat his beloved worse. And the gentle smile of the usually stern man let the lady know that everything was all right. Gradually, the Marquis's heartbeat returned to normal, as she was able to mentally prepare herself. She hadn't done this for several weeks, which was not supposed to be done because of the growing plants. And the detective suddenly wondered why the deceased Marchioness had asked Chelsea to grow that particular herb. Somehow, it didn't seem to her that the whole thing was just the old woman being upset about her failure. The heroine was sure that the spiritual plant would play an important role in the history of the Graydon family. Celia's only regret was that she never had enough cash to finish reading the hero's story. But Welf had the opportunity to personally observe how the plot would unfold for the two lovers. Chelsea froze in amazement at the incredible beauty of the plants that had grown. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes again, as the spiritual grass itself grew in such quantity. She ran as fast as she could into the clearing of plants, as she could not believe her eyes. Falling to the ground, the Marquise burst into tears of resentment because she wanted to show all this to her deceased mother. The girl was worried that she had acted too thoughtlessly and that the old woman would not live to see this moment. Celia watched the couple from the sidelines for a while, not wanting to ruin the moment. The detective was genuinely happy for the Marquise, who was able to succeed in growing flowers. The only thing that didn't satisfy Celia was that the system, for some reason, didn't issue any notification. Just when the lady was finally upset, the window popped out in front of her with congratulations. But the miss drew attention to the fact that the system gave a hint on how to cure the Marquise from the influence of the poison. This forced the girl to distract the partners from each other, although from the outside, it didn't look very nice. Almost wiggling with joy, Welf announced that she knew how to help Chelsea forget about the fruit from her uncle. She said that in the mornings, dew collects on the spiritual grass, which can help Graydon's wife. By using these drops, any toxin can be eliminated from the body after some time. The aristocrat froze with a shocked expression on his face as he realized that his mother knew about this. A tender image of an old woman who always gave her a warm and gentle smile popped into Chelsea's mind. She spoke from the very beginning about wishing her son and daughter-in-law a happy life together. Once again that day, the Marquise burst into tears from an excess of emotions because her mother had given her freedom. Having finished all her chores, Celia went home, happy that the main mission was completed. The girl sincerely believed that such an ending was worthy of the best awards for a good novel. The lady was lucky enough to see with her own eyes how much these two aristocrats loved each other. The heroine saw only positive things in her life, where she got to read her favorite stories about the characters. The lady allowed herself to dream about what kind of heroes she would see during the next investigation of the case. Suddenly, the girl realized that she had completely forgotten about Damon, whom she had left at home. In surprise, she screamed so loudly that the coachman winced from the excess decibels. As soon as the heroine approached her agency, she began to study its decoration from the outside of the street. The interior was clearly visible through the high and now clean windows of the room. Celia was amazed that the boy managed to restore complete order to the building in such a short time. But Welf didn't see him anywhere, so she thought that he had run away with the bag of money. This was also hinted at by the fact that the girl could not find the money bag she had left in the morning. The detective felt satisfaction that all her plans for today had been fulfilled so easily. Celia performed a light-hearted victory pose, allowing her to express her emotions. But suddenly the girl heard Damon's voice behind her, and he had no intention of leaving. She turned around in confusion, as she had not noticed the assistant's presence before. But what struck the girl most was the appearance of the child, who had found a change of clothes for himself somewhere. Damon, as if nothing had happened, reported that he had managed to tidy up just in time for the agency detective to arrive. And Miss could not argue that the boy had a real talent for cleaning houses. Seeing the lady's reaction, the baby even decided that he had done something wrong without her. Celia latched onto his words about him only following the advice in the book. The child immediately handed the finished edition to the detective, as he no longer needed it. And the miss was not delighted that the boy was trying to become her best assistant. However, now the girl could not behave thoughtlessly because it upset Damon. Welf hastened to explain to the little one that he had done an excellent job of fulfilling his duties. But the advice from the manipulation book said to do something else, so the lady pointed her finger at the boy. She demanded that he tell her whether it was true that he had not gone outside, which was forbidden in the morning. In response, the child silently looked at the girl with his innocent and beautiful eyes. Since Damon's appearance matched the heroine's type, she couldn't resist. So the lady took pity and praised the boy for helping her so well. Miss decided for herself that she would still have plenty of time to kick the baby out. Secretly, the detective hoped that she would get used to Damon's charm and be able to throw him out. In the meantime, Celia was going to raise this child, who could become a character in history. But the assistant's cooking and cleaning ended up dragging on for several months. The boy grew up surprisingly quickly and now looked more like a young man. He continued to perform all his duties obediently and carefully, despite the strange mistress. That morning, the detective again behaved unladylike as she slept until lunchtime. Celia herself felt awkward about this, so she pretended nothing had happened. No matter how much the girl tried to get up early, she stubbornly woke up late. Only now did Welf notice her assistant and notice that he had grown larger. This surprised the heroine, who realized that the boy was no longer a small child. But Damon himself did not consider the speed of his growth strange, since everything suited him. He continued to keep a close eye on the house and now discovered that the ceiling was leaking. The lady greeted this information with a sigh because their building was incredibly old. In Mrs. Mind, due to her ignorance, it was easy to fix the roof, so she didn't worry. Damon calmly accepted Celia's suggestion that she fix the roof herself, because with just a few words he convinced the girl not to do this, but to leave everything to him. The detective looked at the boy with surprise, as he still hadn't run away from her. This fact upset the heroine, who did not want to interfere with the plot of another love story. She remembered one of the tips from the book on manipulation and decided to use it. According to him, the girl was supposed to put pressure on her faithful assistant with her presence. And Welf quickly found the guy in the library, wanting to get started with her plan. While Damon was confusedly searching for the book he needed, the lady suddenly approached him. With a straight face, Celia stated that she simply needed to take one of the copies. But the assistant immediately looked away and visibly blushed from embarrassment at such closeness. Miss was going to go all the way, so she stood on tiptoe to get even closer to the guy. And at exactly that awkward moment, a timid client entered the building and stood hesitantly at the door. This left Celia at a significant disadvantage, as she was clutching a young child to her. She immediately jumped away from the boy in panic and turned all her attention to the guest who had come to see her. Celia ran out of the room so quickly that she didn't notice Damon following her. The guy's look wasn't dangerous, but it made it clear that he was rethinking some things in his life because of the lady's actions. And the guest told a sad story about an estate near the sea, which is often stormy. This girl was a servant and accidentally heard the sad voice of her mistress. Curiosity was so aroused that the assistant decided to eavesdrop. It turned out that the two spouses were arguing with each other, as the lady was dissatisfied with everything. Her name was Eliza Reeve, and not long ago she became the bride of a man who fought monsters. He was the famous Carl Lerenth, and he could not give up his profession. No matter how much the man wanted to keep the woman, he did not resist breaking up with her. For the first time, the girl spoke so seriously about how tired she was of living in this place. But the maid was not happy with this outcome because she had already come to sincerely love her mistress. For this reason, while Damon was delivering tea and food, she begged the detective to help her. Celia was in no hurry to agree to the case, even if it was the first in recent months. The maid's appearance inspired confidence, but unexpected complications could arise. The heroine had never heard of the successful front general and owner of the Lerint estate before. The assistant had worked in the building for many years and rarely saw the gentleman who fought with sea monsters. But she knew that, despite the rarity of Carl's appearances, everyone around him sincerely respected him. So the assistant was genuinely worried that the guy and girl broke off their engagement. Celia still couldn't understand why the maid wanted to find her ex-bride. In fact, everyone at the Lerint estate was worried about the girl's sudden disappearance. Moreover, this maid named Annie personally saw what she could not share with others. The thing is that night she did not immediately leave her post where she was eavesdropping. So the girl saw that after Carl left, Eliza sat down at the table with a sad look. In her hands, she tenderly held the compass that her future groom had once given her. Annie took a closer look and discovered that the lady was not all right at that moment. Instead of rejoicing over the broken engagement, Reeve silently shed tears over it. So since then, the assistant could not find peace because she wanted to help her beloved lady. Welf guessed that this case would be no less complicated than the one recently resolved with Chelsea. Annie was so eager to find Eliza that she completely forgot about social manners. The detective found herself trapped because she couldn't refuse such persistence. Besides, the maid's sad look was hard to bear, so Celia agreed to the job. As a result, a book was added to the library that was related to these characters. The heroine understood that it would not be easy for her to cope with this task, that she had to be interesting. She carefully studied all the materials about the missing Eliza, wanting to help the girl. Deep down, Welf hoped that the military man Carl would give her a lot of money as a result of luck. The girl still had a vital need to strengthen and repair her old house. She even thought about adding coziness to the interior if she had money left. Here, Damon suddenly appeared next to the dreaming lady, which, as usual, frightened her. The boy just wanted to clean up after the guest, but Celia was noticeably nervous because of him. Lately, the assistant's gaze had made Miss feel uneasy. So the heroine tried to reduce the amount of contact with Damon, which embarrassed her. Then the guy handed the detective a book, saying that it was the one she had recently been looking for on the shelf. Welf didn't expect to see information about seducing a man on the cover. But the lady had no intention of doing anything like that to her assistant. She guessed that Damon had misunderstood everything because of his recent actions in the library. In her head, Celia became an obsessive and lonely woman, thirsty for warmth. It seemed to her that any normal person should run away from specimens like her. Suddenly, the lady remembered that not long ago she had seen a book with a similar cover in the hands of a guy. Moreover, the initials on both editions seemed suspiciously familiar to the girl. Only a few minutes later, the lady remembered that the same signature was on her congratulations. But the heroine hasn't touched the bouquet she received on the day of her rebirth since then. In the confusion, the detective began to search for flowers throughout the building. As she did not remember where she had put them, she casually called out to Damon and was startled when he immediately responded from behind. In desperation, the lady asked the assistant about the bouquet, as she herself could not find it anywhere. To the detective's surprise, the boy sternly asked who had sent these flowers. But at that moment, Welf didn't even pay attention to them, so she didn't know the answer. Damon admitted with a disgruntled look that he hadn't seen the bouquet, so he couldn't help. So the lady was left with only one option. She hid the flowers herself in a quiet place. This thought led the detective to her desk, which she rarely used. Celia found the locker quite easily and quickly, which for some reason didn't want to open. As a result, the girl managed to open it, but a bunch of papers flew out of the locker. Damon's whole demeanor showed how pleased he was with this turn of events. All because he was the one who had to clean up those papers that had scattered all over the room. Celia let out a strangled gasp, but made no further comment on her actions. The lady was glad that she was able to find the bouquet despite the mess around it. She herself could not believe that she had left artificial flowers in such a place. As a result, the girl had to face the assistant's contemptuous and harmful gaze. And all this was done to make sure that the initials were the same in many places. The detective deservedly led her agency, as she did not believe in such frequent coincidences. For some reason, no one noticed anything strange about the fact that someone lived in the old building. At first, this surprised the girl, but the circumstances turned out to be to her advantage. Only now the lady remembered again that no one had previously known of her existence. However, for some reason, people calmly accept the fact that a girl has appeared nearby. Therefore, a natural question arose in Celia's head about who she had moved into. But even a curious assistant would not have been able to find the answer among the library books. The mysterious man who had placed her here now caused genuine irritation in Miss. So she asked Damon to deal with the flowers from the unknown person on his own. The lady didn't notice how the guy's face darkened a little when he took the flowers in his hands. The only thing that worried the heroine was that she had even more questions in this world. And first of all, she immersed herself in reading the history of her new and interesting case. It began with Eliza, scarred by a fire, receiving an engagement letter. Reeve took this offer as the desperation of a guy who had not found anyone else. The aristocrat had no objections, so she came to the estate on the edge of the sea. But the girl didn't expect to be greeted by a beautiful bouquet of mother-of-pearl flowers there. For the first time in a long time, someone made Reeve blush with embarrassment because of a gift. This military man seemed to her like an extraordinary prince from the southern part of the empire. Everything about the guy's appearance and manners attracted the lady, who was yearning for care and attention. At first, Eliza did not believe in the sincerity of the sailor's intentions, that he could simply want a wedding. She believed that everyone in high society would continue to laugh at her burnt face. The scars left by the old fire prevented the girl from enjoying life. So she was surprised when Carl called these traces beautiful sea waves. From that moment on, Reeve's heart melted completely before the man who said a few words. Eliza never thought before that she would be sincerely happy about her engagement to an aristocrat. Immediately after the wedding, she began going to church to pray for the well-being of her beloved. Surprisingly, Eliza quickly got used to housekeeping without Carl in the house. Everyone at the Laring estate greeted the girl warmly, causing her smile to blossom. What could we say about the tender and warm meetings with Carl, although they were rare? But every time she received a bouquet from a man, the lady never regretted anything in her life. But the girl's happiness lasted until the priest's first visit to her new home. The church representative's face was so serious that the miss didn't expect anything good. And her premonition turned out to be correct, because all the lady's plans were trampled like delicate flowers. After reading all this, the heroine broke into a smile from the touchingness of the new story. She couldn't afford to miss the next chapter because she was eager to know everything. Only it turned out that the lady had managed to spend all the cash, so the chapter could not be opened. Celia realized that she needed to start an investigation to get the money. But this circumstance did not upset the girl at all, who loved difficulties. However, the lady did not expect that during her morning preparations, Damon would ask to go with her. The assistant assured that he would be useful in any matter, so he should be taken with you. Celia wasn't prepared for the guy to suddenly start asking her for something like this. Although Miss had heard that detectives never investigate a case alone, so the heroine couldn't tell the assistant that he was wrong when he asked her to go with her. Damon asked anxiously if the director still didn't want to show him to others. These words from the girl, which she repeated periodically, still confused the young man. However, this time he was determined to get his way, so he demanded to be released into the public eye. The guy promised that he wouldn't seem suspicious to anyone because he would be well disguised. Celia had never seen such determination in her assistant's eyes before. The thought flashed through the lady's mind that her recent false obsession might have had an effect. Miss was secretly glad that the guy could want to run away from her. So the detective packed a suitcase with things for both of them, intending it for her assistant. Well finally believed that Damon could grab a suitcase and go far away. But the guy himself was not thrilled that he was entrusted with carrying such a heavy thing. Soon the heroine arrived at the estate of the Laurent family, which was located on the edge of the sea. Annie greeted the detective with delight, who did not refuse to fulfill her request. Her joy emanated such strong rays of goodness that Celia had to cover herself. It turned out that the maid had also prepared special outfits for the investigators. Only after all the conditions were met did the girl allow the guests into the rooms of the estate. Unlike Celia, Damon calmly accepted the transformation into assistants of the Laurent family. Annie apologized several times for not having time to prepare another reception, so Welf now had to conduct an investigation in an outfit that was inappropriate for it. The lady couldn't help but notice how well Damon fit into the surrounding atmosphere. The guy seemed not to notice that it suited him to wear such an outfit as an estate assistant. Celia didn't focus on this because she had an unsolved case in front of her. The first thing Damon noticed was that the couple's main room was somehow covered in dust. He noticed from the very beginning that the estate looked well kept, despite its antiquity. The fact that the priest also came to this room for Eliza made it special for the heroine. To begin with, the detective began to inspect the entire premises while finding money from the system. However, Celia was unable to find anything specific that would help her investigate the case. In desperation, the girl even decided to look under the furniture in the hope that something had fallen there. Damon watched the director try so hard with a confused look. The heroine realized too late that she looked ridiculous when she acted like this. However, suddenly the assistant supported the lady and knelt down next to her. He asked the girl to leave all the dirty work to him, which made the lady feel embarrassed. And after just a few minutes, the guy found some object that had fallen behind the furniture. It turned out to be a letter from an unknown sender, which brought Miss a large sum of money. Celia and Damon stared at the object, which looked battered and dented. The heroine was ready to swear that she didn't notice anything when she was looking for things on her own. So the girl looked suspiciously at the assistant, who seemed to have a special skill. Like a skilled mother, the guy managed to easily find what the lady had missed. Damon himself was only concerned about whether he was doing enough to support the director. And Celia, without a second thought, affectionately praised the guy who brought her so many coins. A bright blush of embarrassment from the praise crossed the usually cool young man's face. He turned away awkwardly as Miss accidentally overdid her compliments. But the heroine didn't have time to deal with her assistant's feelings because she had a letter in front of her. In it, one of the Labyrinth spouses wrote to the other about the loneliness due to his absence. The lover recalled all those places where they often spent time together alone. The man couldn't even look at the sea because everything around him reminded him of his partner. Judging by the context, the lady assumed that it was Eliza who wrote this letter for Carl. It turned out that the soldier let the girl go so easily that she wanted to leave him. And that meant the detective would have to push the detective to take decisive action. Until then, the heroine had to explore the entire estate to get more information. A couple of hours later, Annie warned Celia that a very important guest would soon arrive. The lady was interested in the fact that some aristocrat personally delivered goods to someone else's estate. Even Damon heard that Carl collected the cores of the monsters he killed in battle for study. Since not every person could carry them with them, Labyrinth had difficulty finding an ally. Welf was grateful for the help with information that the assistant so unexpectedly provided. But even the maid didn't know for what purpose the master was collecting these terrible cores. But the girl was crazy about the incredibly handsome and courteous ally of the estate. Everyone around the assistant was ready to faint at the sight of such an elegant gentleman. The aristocrat could become a source of information for the miss, so she asked to meet with him. Annie took this to mean that even the detective didn't want to miss the chance to see the handsome man. Celia didn't have time to convince her, but at least she managed to get her permission to see the stranger. While waiting for the aristocrat's arrival, the boy and girl were relaxing on a bench in the garden. Despite her inattention, Welf noticed that Damon was sadder than usual. But the guy never shared with the director the emotions and thoughts that visited him. Suddenly, the assistant admitted that he would sometimes like to read his boss's thoughts. The heroine had no idea that Damon actually spent a lot of time in thought. She always suspected that being her assistant was not easy, but the guy never complained. At this moment, Celia was called by one of the maids as the guest was about to arrive. Welf immediately jumped up from her seat because she couldn't calm down due to impatience. Damon was no less tense, so he asked to accompany the director. The guy confidently presented arguments as to why they should go together. But the heroine could not understand why the assistant did not try to run away from her. Remembering the lessons from the book, the lady again resorted to manipulation towards the guy. And the girl's tender words instantly reached Damon's heart, who blushed. So he obediently sat down, promising to wait for the detective to return. In response, Celia happily waved her hand at him, hoping never to meet again. As soon as she turned away, the lady's thoughts were occupied with questions about who she would see now. The man who brought the monster cores had already set foot on the estate's territory. He was the same ship captain the detective had once encountered for Damon's sake. At that moment, the heroine did not even suspect that fate had brought her to such a meeting. The maid left the girl alone with a smile, as she still had a lot of things to do. But Celia was the kind of person who couldn't stand still for long without doing anything. In addition, the system informed the detective that there was a lot of cash in the locked room. This interested the lady so much that she decided to break the entry ban. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable in the room except for the incredible mess. Celia noted with a grin that even her ability to make a mess couldn't compare to this. The lady couldn't help but laugh as she imagined Damon's face when she saw this horrible mess. Miss didn't know how quickly her office would turn into the same place once the assistant left. But right now the detective had to focus on work, putting aside thoughts about the future. And the first thing that attracted the lady was a strange glow from one of the cabinets that contained jars. She guessed that it was the core that Carl had collected for some purpose that was glowing like that. Since the heroine had no magic, she was not going to touch this dangerous object. Instead, the lady began to look around in search of something important. At the same time, Celia couldn't get the thought out of her head about why Carl proposed to Eliza. It was at this very moment that the girl found Labyrinth's diary, which made her incredibly happy. Although it was a violation of personal boundaries, Miss could not resist reading the story. She quickly realized that Carl had not wanted to see Eliza nearby for no reason. But the main plot didn't mention that Lerinth and Reeve had met before. Their story began with one of the balls for aristocrats in a huge and ancient estate. Since the military man began to think about marriage, he went to this event during his vacation. But among high society, the man always stood quietly on the sidelines. He himself understood perfectly well that no girl would want to marry the defender of the empire. And at that moment, Carl heard a loud female voice, which was indignant despite etiquette. His attention was immediately drawn to the dark-haired girl who was defending herself from the attacks of others. One of the aristocrats haughtily declared that the lady who had arrived was spoiling everyone's mood. It was all because the dark-haired lady had scars on her face and she didn't try to hide them. Lerinth had not noticed this lady before, although he had heard that there had been a fire among the aristocrats. And from that very moment, the disfigured girl became a laughingstock among noble ladies. But Eliza was not one to simply hang her head while being openly mocked. So all the ladies' offenders understood from the first time that they should not mess with her anymore. Reeve subtly and accurately noticed any awkwardness in the girls' outfits, which shamed them. She was used to the fact that many people tried to attract attention to themselves at her expense. Such loud and impudent words from the unknown lady impressed Carl incredibly. For the first time, he thought that at least some lady had really interested him. From then on, Laurent began to attend balls more often, just to watch Eliza. Reeve impressed him more and more with her confidence, as she easily repelled all attacks. Carl's heart began to beat anxiously in anticipation of meeting the girl. One evening, upon seeing her, the man decided to come closer to get acquainted. But to his dismay, the soldier took too long to get ready, so he didn't make it. An unknown aristocrat was the first to attract the attention of the lady who stood alone. He happily smiled and invited her to dance together, making several compliments. But the guy did this because he didn't immediately notice the ugly scars on the girl's face. As a result, the man's entire body shuddered in horror at the sight of such an unusual picture. Eliza had noticed this many times, so she tactfully declined her partner's services. That evening, Carl passed by the girl, but in retaliation, he painfully bumped into the aristocrat with his shoulder. Reeve spent her entire life being humiliated by aristocrats because of the mark she suffered in the fire. But she responded to all the caustic ridicule with dignity, although she felt pain in her soul. Many ladies could not accept the fact that they were so easily defeated in eloquence. This made the quarrels between them flare up more and more, but Eliza always remained the winner. No matter how many times the girl was doused or insulted, she diligently pretended that she was okay. During their last meetings at the ball, Carl could hardly restrain himself from standing up for the poor miss. But Eliza continued to smile brazenly back at her offenders, not giving in until the very end. Each time, Reeve easily chose words that offended her rivals many times more. Noticing that the girl had left the estate, Larinth went to look for her for the sake of conversation. He found her quite quickly, sitting near a fountain in the center of a huge garden. Eliza played with the water, trying to find some peace of mind in this quiet element. At the same time, tears were streaming down the girl's face, which she allowed herself to do only when she was alone. Carl was unable to interrupt the quiet cries of the lady who suffered so much from her scars. However, the very next day he began to think about how to help the aristocrat he liked. Even the gentleman's assistant noticed that he had been somehow sad and thoughtful since the morning. But he quickly rejoiced when he heard that Carl had decided to propose marriage. Lerinth was adamant in his opinion to take the dark-haired Eliza Reeve as his wife. But the assistant knew very well about this girl's reputation, so he reacted sadly. The military man was not interested in other people's opinions about his decisions, even if they were strange. For some reason, the man couldn't stop thinking about the girl who was so sad. Imagining Eliza's crying face, Carl felt a wild desire to help her. In Lerinth's dreams, they were together and supporting each other, quietly enjoying happiness. The military man was confident that he could put Reeve on a pedestal and always love her. After reading all this in Carl's diary, the heroine burst into tears from the touching events. She barely managed to calm down, reminding herself that the meeting with the guest would soon take place. The girl had never read such interesting personal diaries of characters before. But even Carl's diary ended abruptly at the most curious point. Therefore, he did not give any explanation for what happened between the young lovers. Out of impatience, the girl began to look for any other clues regarding the Lering case. Suddenly, she heard a pleasant male voice behind her, which frightened her. It turned out to be Cashel Shark, whom the heroine immediately recognized because of his handsome appearance. During all this time, the lady had several disturbing dreams about this impudent, handsome man, and so he stood before her, maintaining exactly the same smug grin of a captain. The system warned that Miss needed to distract her boss from his suspicions about her. Celia panicked and tried to hide her excitement, and the fact that she was the one who had stolen Damon. The guy began the conversation from afar and began by politely introducing himself to the young detective. At the same time, he continued to look closely at the lady as if he recognized her perfectly. In order not to give herself away, the miss deliberately started talking about the luggage of the man who had arrived. As soon as Cashel lifted it from the floor, an incomprehensible black blood began to drip from the suitcase. This frightened the girl even more, as she already did not trust the ship's captain. Shark admitted that he runs a small business that deals in monster parts. Celia herself suspected something similar, but hearing it was much more unpleasant and scary. She was afraid that the system would soon be taken over by another detective, since she would no longer be around. The investigation of this case will be entrusted to a friend of the ship's captain, but the man will be acquitted. Cashel himself behaved extremely naturally and skillfully, as he was accustomed to such situations. His arrogant behavior and ridicule increasingly angered the heroine, who tried to be polite. And the captain suddenly said with a smile that the miss could always turn to him if necessary. But the suitcase behind the man's back hinted to Celia that Shark was not worth messing with. The girl almost fainted from fear when the man opened his luggage in front of her. But it turned out that there had been nothing living in the suitcase for a long time that could cause harm. Under the girl's frightened observation, Cashel deftly placed all the cannonballs in their places. He handled the core with the utmost care, as it emitted incredibly dangerous energy. Shark was sure that this glow was more of a signal from some monsters to others. The lady guessed that only Carl knew all the nuances of this strange and sometimes dangerous business. The detective was so relaxed that she didn't immediately notice the change in Cashel's voice. She stepped back in alarm, realizing it was too late for a hasty escape. The captain leaned toward the lady with a confident grin and announced that he would now be asking the questions. As the system warned the heroine, the man suspected her from the very beginning. He easily remembered several of the girl's characteristics that hinted to him that she was a detective. Welf had been warned by the system, so she knew she would have to fight for herself. Like a real shark, Shark liked to approach his prey from afar, so he circled around the main topic. Celia stubbornly kept her usual work smile on her face, just so as not to scare off a potential client. But the captain's phrases were deliberately so caustic that the lady could hardly restrain herself. She understood that the man was provoking her, but this realization didn't make the girl feel any better. Welf tried unsuccessfully to prove that she would help anyone in need in the investigation of the case. For the heroine, it didn't matter what kind of person he turned to her. The most important thing was that he had loved ones. This line of reasoning pleased Cashel, although he did not immediately reveal his feelings to the detective. The captain asked with deliberate contempt if everyone really had something important that they wanted to return. He hinted that a man might appear who would have no one and for whom no one would wait. The girl understood perfectly well that the conversation was actually about Damon, who was lost and lonely in life. Cashel was sure that if he pressed the detective a little more, she would definitely crack. He was interested to know what happened to the child he allowed to run away with the girl. So Shark was surprised when the lady said she had never met anyone so lost. Celia reminded that all her clients are desperately looking for someone close, which is why she works with them. No matter how the lady tried to speak casually, she was afraid to reveal her connection with Damon. She used all her skill in eloquence, which caused the captain to suddenly stop asking questions. The girl's heart beat at an incredible speed from fear, but she did not retreat for a moment. Suddenly, Keschel admitted with a smile that he had indeed been asking strange questions all this time. The successful completion of the system's mission made Welf, who was on edge, incredibly happy. She silently prayed to all the shark gods for such a rescue from the captain. The lady was reassured by the fact that the system was on her side, so the dialogues were easier. Shark finally left the poor detective alone, although he still found her extremely interesting. He smiled slyly and said that he considered the girl's taste to be surprisingly good. Only now did the heroine realize why the maids fell in love with this impudent man. The man easily gave compliments, although he had no intention of meeting anyone. He smiled so joyfully and cheerfully that it seemed as if the world was becoming a little brighter. As he said goodbye, the guy gently touched the lady's lips and promised to treat her to a cup of tea. Despite the captain's sweet expression, a strong chill ran through Miss's entire body. Shark handed the detective his business card so she could contact him at any time. But the lady was sure that she would never in her life write to this guy about this matter. However, Keschel himself leaned so close to the miss as if he wanted to kiss her tenderly. But in reality, the man was simply teasing the girl, laughing at her nervous reactions. The heroine could hardly wait for the moment when the captain would finally leave her alone. But he was sure that they would meet again, because he knew what he did not tell. Soon after, Celia was completely free, although she was very exhausted from the investigation. She still hoped that Damon had enough time to quickly run away. The girl thought many times about how much the guy resembled the character in the novel. However, he brushed aside his happy future, preferring to stay with the detective. It was for this reason that the girl so stubbornly drove away her faithful assistant. She approached the bench and immediately discovered that it had been empty for quite some time. This made the heroine so happy that she struck a victory pose, celebrating the moment. But the lady was so lost in her dreams that she didn't hear the footsteps gradually approaching her. Damon's quiet voice followed, causing Celia to freeze in place in horror. The guy was angry that the detective didn't even try to find him. He was afraid of being abandoned, and she seemed to be deliberately trying to make this happen. Welf turned around in confusion to look at the assistant she had expected never to see again. She realized that she had gotten herself into an extremely awkward situation because she had jumped to conclusions. The lady had to use all her eloquence to convince the guy to stop being angry. But even after that, she still felt his displeased and suspicious gaze on her. Unable to bear it any longer, Celia began to accuse her assistant of leaving without her. The reminder that he wasn't allowed to leave only made the tied-up Damon happier. However, the young man was still too upset with his mistress for leaving with another man. The guy tried to make it look like nothing was stopping him from taking a little walk. He hinted to the lady in every possible way that he had seen her with the captain, but the girl did not understand anything. Instead, the girl quickly closed the topic as she did not want to talk about herself. With a sigh, the heroine asked her assistant to be much more careful next time. Diamond froze in place when he heard such simple words that were spoken to him for the first time. Celia still had no idea what influence she had on the lonely boy. So the detective didn't really believe her assistant's promise to never lose her again. The lady didn't take Damon seriously only because she still remembered him as a boy. However, the guy had grown up long ago, so he caused problems for the short-sighted girl. Miss enjoyed watching the assistant gradually develop and begin to show character. At times, Damon would be so abrupt that the lady would flinch in surprise. At such moments, images of the possible development of their relationship flashed through the detective's head. This made Celia even more wary of the assistant, who didn't understand anything. Even in the carriage, the detective continued to think about her case related to the hero Carl. She was worried that Eliza suddenly disappeared right after her conversation with the priest. So the temple remained the only place where all the characters in the novel intersected. So the lady gave Damon the task of requesting an audience for her at the church. And the lady herself was looking forward to the moment when she would be able to read the main story. Miss was inattentive to the assistant, so she did not see how he was carefully watching her. Damon didn't share the thoughts that were going through his mind, but a shadow of worry could be seen on his face. As soon as she returned to the agency, the lady immediately opened the book offered by the system. She couldn't help but want to know the rest of Eliza's story. One day, the girl was quietly reading in a chair, waiting for her beloved husband to return. And Carl unexpectedly hugged the lady from behind, pleased that she had been waiting for him. The couple immediately began to talk sweetly to each other as they missed each other. Lerinth never missed a single opportunity to praise his wife for the order in the estate. Each such meeting ended with a hot night in bed while the spouses enjoyed their reunion. And this time the conversation accidentally turned to the military exploits of Charles, who travelled by sea. He admitted that once, upon seeing a monster, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. It was after this incident that the man began to collect fragments of sea monsters. Previously, Carl had not told anyone about his feelings, as he did not want to face distrust. But he felt calmer because Eliza didn't laugh at such stupid words. Hugging his wife, whom he loved madly, Lerinth confessed that he was waiting for a hero. According to the prophecy, during all protracted wars a man appears on the seashore. And Carl believed that the chosen one of the goddess was able to end all the long wars. Reeve remembered her husband's words because she wanted to always be close to him in the future. Such conversations with her husband made her truly happy, although they were few and far between. From that very day on, the girl began to pray to the temple even more to keep Carla alive. She had no idea that she would have a direct influence on the choice of the goddess's new chosen one. The priests waited for several decades for their patroness to choose a hero. And finally, the main room of the temple was illuminated by a bright light with the blessing of everyone around. Only at this point, the system again demanded that the heroine pay coins. The heroine tried not to be upset because she was sure that she would find something in the temple. Having learned almost the whole story, she decided that Carl had become the hero from the prophecy. But Eliza's words and actions did not fit into this scenario, no matter how the lady tried to put it together. According to the book, the lovers were truly happy with each other, which added to Mrs. Problems. She could only hope that the temple would not delay the visit so that the work could continue. Celia had been reading all night again, so she couldn't open her eyes even when she heard footsteps. She remembered that Damon had to go out for groceries and heard the rustling of a bag. However, Welf did not move from the spot due to the incredible fatigue that suddenly fell upon her. The girl didn't know what the assistant would do in such a situation, but she trusted him. And the guy was unhappy that the director had fallen asleep again in the most inappropriate place. But he didn't wake the detective, but only tenderly covered her with a warm and light sheet. Before leaving, the young man whispered a few phrases to the lady, but she could not hear anything. Full of strength and energy, Celia sleepily opened her eyes only early the next morning. The girl didn't expect that Damon would behave so quietly that she wouldn't even wake up. Welf began to feel that the assistant was acting strangely after their return from the estate. The lady couldn't understand why the guy was so worried about her leaving him, and at some moments he looked at the director so angrily as if he was ready to kill her. At the same time, a sad expression still periodically flashed across the young man's face. The heroine's greatest fear was that in Damon's eyes, she seemed like an intrusive family member. She was tired of going through and trying options that would allow her to kick the guy out. Here, the system responded to the detective's despair and offered her a solution to her difficult problem. She delighted the girl with a long-awaited update, something that had not happened for quite some time. Celia didn't miss this opportunity, and the screen lit up brightly after her actions. It turned out that the system laughed a little at the lady and took her story as an example. The window informed that in the first stage, there was no need to be afraid of failure in any relationship, because soon the object of manipulation will force the manipulator to run away. The system insisted that it was all about consistency, because everyone could start to get annoying. Therefore, if the lady remains as determined as before, her assistant will definitely run away. But Celia was dissatisfied with the information provided, which was too little. The heroine understood that she had shown the guy the full extent of her obsession, so there was no turning back. And as usual, the girl found herself in an awkward situation in front of the assistant who returned. She turned nervously and looked at him, trying to figure out how long he had been here. Welf didn't expect Damon to report that someone was urgently waiting for the detective outside. The miss, with curiosity, hastened to carry out the instructions given by the guest. She was wary of clients because she was already under investigation. But it turned out that representatives of the temple had arrived to escort the detective to the church. The heroine was embarrassed by such formality because she could have gotten there just fine herself. But the temple representatives insisted on their proposal as they had a compelling argument. Celia didn't expect that the high priest would personally insist on her presence in the temple. Therefore, the lady immediately got into the carriage, which quickly took her to her important destination. She was in such a hurry that she didn't even argue with Damon, who followed behind. The first thing that impressed the girl was the statue of the sea goddess that stood at the entrance to the main temple. The priest noticed the detective's curiosity, so he told him a little about the history of the church. In its hands, the stone statue held the light of instruction, which had meaning during the prophecies. The priest was delighted with the item, which was supposed to help all lost souls on their way. Welf agreed with the temple assistant, who was delighted with this holy statue. The detective was interested in the extent to which the church servants themselves were able to recreate this light. Instead of answering, the priest began to sell the lady some of the church goods from the temple. But approaching the table with the items unexpectedly brought Miss several coins from the system. Meanwhile, the guy promised that any amulet could save the girl from disaster. But Celia was happy that almost all the things were evidence for which she received money. Meanwhile, the priest began to offer goods to Damon, who did not appreciate such bravery. Welf only laughed at the young detective, who maintained a gloomy expression. The girl promised that the young man would not need any amulet because she would protect him. These words sank into the soul of the boy, who had already begun to fall in love with the director. So once again, Damon turned away in embarrassment, pretending to cough from laughter. Celia stared at her assistant in surprise, as she had not expected such a reaction from him. She remembered how a few hours ago they were still riding in the church carriage to the temple. At that moment, the heroine, out of boredom, began to pester the guy to make him run away from her. And Damon almost immediately turned away, as he was not ready for close communication. This made Celia even happier, and she tried with all her might to drive the young man out of the house. Only now did the girl think that the guy had been able to hold back his laughter even then. This would mean that the assistant never took the lady seriously because of her actions. However, Damon suddenly confidently announced that he trusted his headmistress's promise. Welf gazed at the young man's face, which seemed to become more and more handsome with each passing day. But then the priest reminded them of his presence and that they were guests of the temple. As they walked down the corridor, the detective tried to find out at least something about the chosen hero. However, for some reason, the assistant reacted nervously to any mention of such a person. He admitted that he couldn't tell anything, although it was clear that he was actually hiding the truth. Celia didn't understand why the priests were so careful not to say anything about the hero. She was sure that by this time the blessing should have already happened in the dark night. Even the temple's high priest, Meriden, carefully avoided the topic. So the lady began the conversation with the usual greetings, approaching the important topic from afar. The priest thanked the great goddess for many things, considering himself a worthy child of hers. It turned out that the old man also did not know where exactly Eliza Reeve had disappeared to not long ago. Welf was a little disappointed, as she had hoped that she would be able to find answers to her questions. From the priest's behavior, Miss guessed that he really was hiding something from her. So the heroine directly reported that she knew about the recent prophecy about the hero in this temple. The girl found it suspicious that for some reason no one in the temple spoke about this. The priest felt guilty for trying so desperately to hide the truth from the public around him. The lady admitted that she learned about the prophecy because she had thoroughly investigated Eliza's case. Miss was interested to hear what the priest talked about with Reeve just before she disappeared. The old man found himself pinned to the wall by numerous arguments and a huge sense of guilt. So he said that the hero was not actually a warrior, but a holy victim. The heroine was frightened when she heard that they were talking about sacrifice. The priest suspected that Eliza had fled because she had learned a difficult truth about her faith. But Celia still didn't fully understand why Reeve had reacted so strongly to the prophecy. The priest delayed his explanations until the last minute because he felt sad about it. The whole thing was that the girl went to the cursed island for sacrifice. Sea creatures were constantly circling around, not yet daring to come out onto land. This is because it was Eliza who was chosen by the goddess as the new hero for the war, and the lady bore this burden with a heavy heart, wanting to save her beloved from eternal suffering. She voluntarily went to this terrible and rainy place, hoping to end the war. Her own face increasingly reminded the girl of the horrors of brutal military action. A few weeks before, she had shared with her faithful servant that she had been seeing the same dream. Annie naively decided that the goddess was simply fulfilling the wishes of the good lady. Even then, Eliza had a premonition that this matter would not end so simply. For some reason, the girl did not think that such dreams were a sign of a good and calm future. As a result, a few days later, late at night, the priest rushed to the young girl. She greeted the priest with caution, as he had come with urgent news. The old man was so overcome with emotion that he could not find words for a long time, because he had just heard the prophecy. But Eliza was ready to face any information with steadfastness, as she had already experienced a lot. Meriden felt sincerely sorry for this good girl who had a hard fate. Hearing that the prophecy about the hero had appeared, the lady almost burst into tears of joy. She smiled softly, as this meant that now she and Carl would always be together. But to the girl's horror, the priest suddenly called out her name, no matter how much he wanted it to be different. So now young Eliza had to bear responsibility for everything that happened in the war. After that conversation, heavy thoughts did not leave the lady, who was completely confused. She couldn't accept the fact that she was the very hero who was required to sacrifice. But even having given her own life, Eliza wanted to help Carl, who was constantly fighting. She made wishes upon falling stars many times, praying for a hero to appear. And these prayers played a cruel joke on the girl, who was ultimately chosen as a goddess. Reeve took some comfort in the fact that she could end this war with the monsters with her own hands. Misunderstood perfectly well that Meridian would not be able to find any other solution. To prevent Carl from being sad when she left, the lady decided to make him stop loving her. That's why Eliza acted out a scene in which she was dissatisfied with her life. But the man's love was so strong that he silently let his beloved go. Larinth sincerely wished happiness to the girl who no longer wanted to live next to him. So Reeve quickly got the engagement broken off, even though it made her heart ache. At parting, Carl sadly asked if they would be able to meet after the end of the war. But the girl could not admit to him that she planned to die so that the battle would end. The last thing Meridian knew about Eliza was that she had come to their temple to ask questions. But everyone around refused to send the young girl to the island of sacrifice. Celia didn't have to think much to figure out where exactly Reeve had gone. Suddenly, at that moment, the doors swung open and Carl, filled with emotion, flew into the room. They had never met before, so Celia quickly introduced herself to the stern man. But he was not at all interested in her story, since Larinth was only looking for Eliza. Welf anxiously tried to catch up with the military man, who was acting like a maddened animal, and Carl angrily demanded that no one interfere with him finding his beloved in the near future. The heroine could not help but feel all the horror that the soldier inspired in her with just one glance. But then she felt the presence of Damon behind her, who was displeased with Larinth. The girl guessed that the guy came to support her in such an unpleasant situation. Meanwhile, the priest tried to stop the military man from visiting the cursed island, but the man was determined at all costs to return his recently missing wife. Then Meridian shouted in front of everyone that no one had ever returned from that island of death. This only made the heroine more afraid, although she did not want to give up the case. But Carl didn't care at all what happened to him, because he wanted to see his beloved. The man blamed himself for what was happening, so he could not afford to remain inactive in this situation. All this time he was just waiting for the war to end on its own, and for Reeve to happily return to him. Only now did Carl realize how pathetic and stupid he had been in his inaction. Celia felt genuinely sorry for this stern man who was head over heels in love with the lady. Damon noticed that after the aristocrat's words, the detective suddenly thought about something important. He easily guessed what the headmistress was worried about, so he decided to help in the investigation. The boy handed Celia a letter that they had recently found in the Laurent family living room. At first, the lady thought that this message was written sadly by Eliza for Carl. But then it dawned on Miss that the writer's handwriting did not resemble delicate feminine lines. Moreover, the military man had eyes of a different color, which meant that the letter was not written by Eliza. Only now did the detective realize that she had made a big mistake at the very beginning, choosing the wrong sender. Carl was so worried about his beloved that he could hardly respond adequately to conversations. The heroine gave the man his letter, with which he had so eagerly awaited Eliza's return. Laurent remembered every word from the message perfectly because he had spent a long time choosing them. And the detective's task was now to explain to the man where and why his wife had disappeared. Celia didn't yet know whether Carl could stop his beloved, but she had no right to remain silent. Welf turned to Laurent because she didn't want to tell herself why Reeve became a victim. But Carl remained just as confused, since there was no clue in his head either. Then the heroine suggested that Eliza sacrificed herself for the sake of a peaceful life for her beloved. In fact, the young girl deeply respected and loved her first and only husband. The military man had no idea how strong the emotions the lady felt towards him were. He whispered sadly that he just wished that Miss would always stay by his side. At that moment, the assistant suddenly burst into the room and shouted that new monsters had appeared. But Carl wanted to look for his beloved instead of fighting monsters again. However, Celia reminded that Eliza would like to continue to see the hero in her beloved. She confidently promised that she would definitely find the girl while Laurent was protecting the Empire. The soldier himself understood that the sword in his sheath would always be a reminder of his duty. So he resigned himself to his fate and asked the detective to return his wife unharmed. Welf was pleasantly surprised when such a noble man entrusted his future to her. So the lady quickly set sail on a ship, although she had no plan. The priest did not leave the girl alone and took a map with them to tell her everything in detail. Meriden promised to tell everything he knew about this terrible and deadly island. Damon also got involved in the process, although Celia didn't believe that he would help her in any way. The priest pointed with trepidation to a place somewhere in the center of the map that was not marked in any way. He admitted that this island is not marked on purpose so that no one would find their way there. It was not for nothing that the island was called Terrible, because the mana flows on it were very strong. Celia guessed that in that place all space and time were distorted, which is why it was so dangerous. The priest confirmed that even the time dimension on the island is different from the rest of the world. This meant that they needed to get Eliza out of this confinement as soon as possible. The whole matter was complicated by the fact that Celia had no idea how to get to the island. Meriden could not give an answer to this question, since he had not spoken to the girl. Then the thought occurred to the lady that Reeve could have been helped by someone she knew, connected with the estate. This person must have a good knowledge not only of Eliza, but also of the sea, and also possess mana. Of all the people Celia knew, only Keschel fit this description perfectly. Welf remembered with fear, because she remembered that the man was sure of their meeting. But the lady was not at all happy to see this impudent and handsome ship captain again. Miss wrote a letter to Shark a few days ago, but was still waiting for his answer. The heroine was incredibly angry that Carl's friend treated his wife so cruelly. However, right now the girl couldn't speed up events, so she had to just wait. Besides, the detective had to come up with a reason not to take Damon with him to Keschel. She flinched in fear when she suddenly heard the voice of her assistant, who was still awake. It turned out that the guy had been reading a book until late, just to wait for the headmistress. Celia thought that he would have gone to bed long ago, but the young man explained that he was worried about her. Damon himself couldn't understand why he had such a strong desire to see the detective. Miss couldn't help the assistant in any way, because she still wanted him to leave her. However, after so many months of fruitless attempts, the heroine began to get tired of herself. So Welf gradually abandoned her desire for Damon to live an independent life. She started a serious conversation about how she couldn't possibly take the guy with her on her next job. In response, Damon tenderly and hopefully asked the headmistress to return as soon as possible. Celia was surprised by the guy's emotions because she didn't intend to be left without a home. The young man was more serious than ever when it came to talking to the young girl. But Welf still couldn't understand his train of thought, so she sighed tiredly in response. Here on the table, the heroine noticed one of the books, which seemed surprisingly familiar to her. She realized that in the novel, Carl was reading this very work while waiting for his beloved. And right now, Damon had this reading material in his hands, which hardly bothered his thoughts. The girl realized that for some reason, the assistant had been waiting for her return. The lady was pleased to realize that at least some person in this world was waiting for her at home. In her past life, the heroine had always lived alone, so this feeling of warmth from the young man was new to her. She touched her chest, feeling her heart beat faster in response to all the emotions. But Celia immediately reminded herself that Damon would leave her alone someday anyway. Although the guy assured that he would not be able to sleep peacefully in the absence of the mistress of the estate. However, the girl pushed away all pleasant thoughts because she was afraid of the consequences of separation. Damon didn't notice any changes in the lady's soul, so he simply wished her a good rest. For the first time in a long time, the guy smiled at the lady incredibly sincerely and joyfully. Because of this, the next morning the girl could not come to her senses, thinking about the young man. Celia had never seen the assistant display such intense emotion. That's why she even began to feel as if yesterday's smiling Damon was part of a dream. Suddenly the heroine heard an unusual knock, but she didn't understand where it was coming from. Following him, the detective and her assistant carefully climbed up to the second floor. It turned out that some kind of mad-looking bird was hitting the window glass with all its might. Celia rushed towards her in horror to prevent another broken window in the building. And the bird calmed down only when the girl opened the shutters in front of it. The heroine had never interacted with animals before, so she didn't know what to do. And the bird stared at the lady as if nothing had happened, as if it had always lived in her house. Welf, helpless, even turned to her assistant, but he too did not communicate with the birds. Then the detective had the idea that there was a homing pigeon in front of her. The heroine was inspired by this thought, because this is exactly what happened in many detective stories. But the bird suddenly spoke and did not let the girl even touch it with her finger. She jumped up and hit Celia hard on the forehead with her paw as a punishment. The detective was so amazed by the parrot's impudence that she froze in place in silence. Only a minute later did the lady find the strength to complain to the assistant about the lawlessness. Welf was very upset that such a simple animal did not respect her at all. Meanwhile, the parrot continued to sit majestically on the windowsill, not intending to fly away. He told the girl that he would soon send a carriage for the petty thief. But the detective couldn't understand what they were talking about, since it was the first time she had talked to parrots. The strangeness and incomprehensibility of the situation increasingly irritated Miss, who loved clarity. Here the bird began to count arrogantly, although it never explained what it was talking about. The heroine realized that all her attempts to find out information were completely useless. Suddenly, when the parrot finished counting, she heard the neighing of noble horses. And then an expensive carriage pulled up to the detective's house, aiming to take her to the ship.